Welcome, Rotarians and guests, to the last Monday meeting of our August series. We're very fortunate to have great hospitals in our particular area, and we're happy to have Mike Abrams with us today to talk about the state of the hospitals in the local area. We're going to begin with a reflection from Father O, followed by, remember this is the last Monday of the month, so we'll do the Rotarian Creed, which is our four-way test. George Eichstetter will lead us. And finally, the pledge by Jason Kusama will lead us from there. Father O.
Lord, our God and Father, our thoughts, hearts, and prayers are directed today to all those suffering the effects of the hurricane, especially in Texas. In their loss and suffering, please somehow let them know that they are still your beloved sons and daughters and that you have great care for them. And Father, bless those good and courageous women and men, both professional and volunteer, who are rushing to their aid, reaching out their arms to help. Today, our Rotary program focuses on hospitals, those institutions erected to bring comfort and healing to those in distress. Bless all those who work in and for our hospitals. They are partners in your work of giving life to the full. To these and to the prayers of our hearts we say, Amen.
George?
Yes. Is it the truth?
Is it the truth?
Second, is it fair to all concerned?
Is it fair to all concerned?
Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships?
Will it build goodwill and better friendships?
Fourth, will it be beneficial to all?
Will it be beneficial to all?
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Father O, George, and Jason. Thanks to our sponsor this month, YARC. Again, if you're interested in being a sponsor, it certainly helps out with the monthly meetings that we have here. Please contact the office. Do we have any visiting Rotarians? Tom Backoff.
Well, I'm not the visiting Rotarian, President Sharon, but I do have with me a very special visiting Rotarian. We are very fortunate to have with us Dr. Frances Jeffries. Fran is a Rotarian from Bridgewater, Massachusetts, and in 2016 she was certified as a Rotary Peace Fellow. So Fran is trained in peace negotiation and conflict resolution. She was in Ann Arbor recently at the World Peace Conference that our district helped to sponsor. And there at the conference, she met many members of our club. We invited Fran and told her about our transformational project on Lake Erie water. And Fran agreed to help us. So she is here today to meet with the Water Committee as we begin to focus on some community conversations. And if you've read The Blade over the last several days, last couple of weeks, you might realize there's a little bit of conflict as it relates to Lake Erie. So Fran is here to help us today. So Toledo Rotarians, if you'd put your hands together and give Fran a warm Toledo Rotary welcome.
Thank you, Tom and Fran. We're very honored to have you with us today. Thanks for being here. How about any visiting guests? If you have some guests, would you please bring them to the floor, Mike, and introduce them?
President Sharon, fellow Rotarians, I'm pleased to introduce Julia Wiley, a law partner of mine at RCO Law. Julia is also the current president of the Society of Ohio Healthcare Attorneys.
Welcome, Julia.
And President Sharon, my guest today is Craig Alberts. Craig is the president of Mercy Health St. Charles Hospital and my colleague.
Welcome, Craig.
President Sharon, I have with me Chris Becker, President of Bionics Development Corporation, and Brett Smith, Director of Marketing.
Welcome, gentlemen.
President Sharon, I have my guest here today, Randy Rothenbuehler. He's our CFO and a prospective member.
Welcome, Randy. Thanks to all who are bringing guests to our meeting. So I wanted to tell you that on this day in 1963, Martin Luther King gave his speech, "I Have a Dream." And we all know how very, very powerful that was and how it helped curb and guide us to what we are today as a country. But you know, Rotary has a dream too, and that's eradicating polio. 2.5 billion, think about that, 2.5 billion children have been immunized year to date. And I'm happy to say, thanks to Tim, who keeps us on the update, Nigeria has been polio-free now for a year. So we still have 9 cases in the world, but truly we're getting this close, so we'll keep at it. I want to tell you that you should check out the Rotary International website. They actually have webinars for members, and one of the webinars that they've got for the month of September is the very first one that they're going to do about the life cycle of service projects, from inception to evaluation. And perhaps one thing that maybe as a club we could do better is truly evaluating the projects after they've come to fruition. So I encourage you to check it out. I have a sense that I suspect that this is probably applicable to a lot of what we do in our business lives too. So today we're happy to have a couple new members, and our first one will be introduced by our honorary member, Dick Anderson. Dick has been a member since 1959, and we're so glad to have him, and he's here today to introduce Pat Bowe, CEO of Anderson's. Dick.
Oh, thank you, Sharon. Today I have the pleasure of introducing Pat Bowe, CEO of the Andersons, as a new member of Toledo Rotary. Pat is serving as the 5th CEO in the 70-year history of our company, and the first who is not an Anderson family member. Pat joined the Andersons from Cargill Incorporated, a company with which we share a long history and similar values. He spent 30 years with Cargill, serving in numerous roles, including corporate vice president, and has 35 years altogether of experience in the agricultural sector. This experience, paired with Pat's character and personal value system, provides a strong cultural fit for the Andersons. Pat graduated from Stanford University with both a bachelor's and master's degree. He also played football for Stanford. Not a big surprise, is it? And he was a first team academic All-America tight end. Pat and his lovely wife, Mary Louise, who is with us here today, have 6 grown children and will soon move into their new home on the Maumee River in Perrysburg. We're delighted to have Pat be part of the Andersons, the Toledo community, and the Rotary Club of Toledo. His ethics, values, and service mindset are a perfect fit for our company and for Northwest Ohio. Please join me in welcoming Pat Bowe to Toledo Rotary.
So the next gentleman really doesn't need an introduction, Mr. Kevin Mullen. We kind of nicknamed him our Energizer Bunny, and he is here to introduce Bob Tucker for Robinson, Curfew, and O'Connell.
Gee, thanks, President Sharon. I had a dream this morning. It was that I would get up on the microphone and not have to follow Dick Anderson. Nonetheless, President Sharon, my fellow Rotarians, it's my pleasure to introduce Bob Tucker as a new member of the finest Rotary Club in the world. A Toledo native, Bob did his undergrad at Georgetown University before attending UT's College of Law. He's an attorney at RCO Law, where he practices civil litigation with an emphasis on commercial litigation and medical malpractice defense. If you know what that means, you can talk to him about it afterwards. I don't. Prior to joining RCO Law, Bob spent a year clerking for Toledo Rotary and U.S. District Court Judge Jack Zuhairi and U.S. Magistrate Judge James R. Knepp. Bob and his wife Kristen live in West Toledo with their 2 young children. The phrase active in the community might be an understatement for Bob. He serves as co-chair of the Emerging Leaders Council for Able and Lawo, on the executive committee for the Lucas County Democratic Party, involved in a number of legal professional associations. And get this, he serves on the board for Toledo Unleashed, which operates the Glass City Dog Park, even though Bob doesn't even have a dog. Bob graduated from Leadership Toledo in 2014, where he received the 60 Minutes Award for asking the most insightful questions. So we can look forward to him stepping up to the floor mic in future meetings and bringing the same gusto to Toledo Rotary. Mike, you have a free pass today because he's up at the head table. You're welcome. As if Bob wasn't busy enough, he's also the host of Toledo Matters, a podcast with a mission to share stories of Toledoans that exemplify the best of what our city has to offer. Available online at ToledoMatters.com or anywhere you listen to your favorite podcasts. That'll be $5. Throughout their 41 episodes, Bob and his team of podcasters have interviewed several prominent Rotarians, including Joe Napoli, Lori Hauser, Romulus Durant, Zach Vassar, and Ken Leslie. Now, Bob, I searched the website countless times. I just couldn't find the episode that featured me, so perhaps that one's still in production. My fellow Rotarians, please join me in giving a big Rotary welcome to Bob Tucker.
Just a reminder of the Membership Engage and Retain Committee's initiative on the Fishbowl for networking. Again, I encourage you as you leave here today to grab a name out of the fishbowl and make a date for coffee or lunch or dinner or whatever you'd like to do with that member and get to know your members of your club. And the Water Service Committee, Janina Douglas, please come to the floor mic with an announcement for the Water Service Committee.
Good afternoon. And I had a dream that I didn't have to follow Kevin Mullen.
Boy, we're all dreamers.
But I am. As you all know, we've had 2 outstanding years of water conferences that the Toledo Rotary, together with our District 6600, has sponsored, where we've brought in the order of 300 people to Toledo to talk about our water issues. This year, we have an added treat. Our conference this year is going on the road. And that means we're going to have a series of events all over the district, opportunities for you to get out and actually walk the ground and see what is a 2-stage ditch. What are these people talking about when they tell me this and tell me that? And our first event, which is up on the board now, is, if we can roll back, there we go, September 22nd, it's a Friday, we're going out on the farms. There are a number of demonstration farms down in the Blanchard River watershed, which is a very important watershed around Findlay, Hancock and Hardin counties, and 3 farmers are opening up their farms for us to go out and, again, like I said, see, what does it mean to do no-till? What does it mean to do cover crops? What does it mean to put fertilizer on in the right way and make sure it stays on the field and not get in the water? One of the farms we're going to is actually going to be a hog farm. So you hear all these bad things about CAFOs. See that there are good ways to run these operations as well. These folks are dedicating changes in their business to make sure that nutrients don't get into Lake Erie and cause us these algal problems. We need to support this kind of progressive work in the farming community. And it's a very cheap trip. At $30, you board a bus, you're on for the 3 farms, you'll be back in Findlay at 3 o'clock, and on your way home, you can even make it to football games that night. The next one that we're going to have, and Walter, if you can advance the slides, is going to be on October 7th, And this one, I hate to even talk about it this early because this is going to fill up so fast, it's not going to be funny. We have Rotary Day out on Lake Erie. So we go to the farms, then we're going to the lake. Ohio Sea Grant, the director of Ohio Sea Grant, has given us a Rotary Day on Gibraltar Island, which is Stone Lab. We're going to take a tour out on the water. We're going to collect algae. We're going to go into the lab. You're going to learn what algae looks like. Again, $30. That includes your ferry ticket over there. It includes a box lunch over there. So you can't beat these. They are both available for registration on DACDB. If you don't know, you go to the calendar for the district in DACDB and you can sign up. If you don't know how to do that, give me a call, give Kathy a call. We can walk you through it. Like I like to say, come out. It's time for us to get our feet wet and our hands dirty, learning about how to keep Lake Erie clean. Okay? So I look forward to as many Toledo Rotarians as we can possibly get into these two events. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Janina. For those of you that don't know, Janina is not only our Water Service Committee chair, but she is also the chair at the district level. So, vice chair. We often share our chairs, I think, as we move through the organization. So, great way to get involved. The water and the lakes are so very, very precious to us. And our club has already done a lot of work in this area. So, again, we continue the momentum. And part of what we're trying to do here is just make a difference and find out, as Joe Napoli said, who's in charge and how to make people accountable. So please get involved. Also, a great time to check in on social media. Say that you're making a difference in the world at the Toledo Rotary Club. Check in, and then, of course, shut your phones off and check out for an hour as you enjoy the gift of Rotary. So today, Joe Sharp is going to introduce our speaker, Mike Abrams. So, Joe, thank you.
Thank you, President Sharon. It's my pleasure to introduce Mike Abrams, President and CEO of Ohio Hospital Association. His topic today is Repeal, Replace, Expansion, the changing role of Ohio's hospitals. Mike leads a team of 65 associates, supports a 20-member board of trustees, and works with 1,900 members of 7 OHA-affiliated societies. He works closely with hospital and health system executives and leaders to assess healthcare trends and review policies impacting the industry. Prior to OHA, Mike was the Executive Vice President and CEO of Iowa Medical Society. Mike is a graduate of Indiana University, where he earned a bachelor's degree in political science and a master's degree in public administration. Please welcome Mike.
Well, I had a dream that I gave this presentation and nobody fell asleep after that extraordinarily hearty lunch that we all just enjoyed. So I do appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I appreciate that Kevin pronounced this the best Rotary in the world. I love the pride that you show in your organization. And I don't know that that's true. I suspect it is, but I will pronounce that you guys do have the best food of any of the Rotaries that I've been privileged to speak at. It's also been nice to enjoy your warm hospitality and run into some old friends here. Lee Weldon, who I have not seen in many years, it was great to reconnect with an old medical society buddy. And also I saw Dr. Bob Coase, and I've been good friends with him and his wife since I got to Ohio, since I returned to Ohio almost 6 years ago, and Dan Wakefield and others that have been very, very supportive of the hospital community. Our organizations do have a couple things in common. We're about the same age. We celebrated our 100th birthday a couple of years ago. We were founded at Cedar Point, at that hotel there at the Breakers. And if you go to Cedar Point, you go to the back of the Breakers, you'll see a historic marker that commemorates the founding of OHA that was placed during our centennial celebrations. And also, obviously, we do a lot of work in healthcare. We do because we are the hospital association, but you do because you care about healthcare. And if they ever build a museum to polio eradication, there will be a huge room and display that thanks and commemorates Rotary's work in polio eradication. So I definitely want to thank you on behalf of everybody who cares about healthcare for the really Herculean effort and heroic work that you've done. It's always on the list of greatest public health achievements of all time, and that is only because the Rotary has been the laboring oar in that effort. I really enjoyed also reading a little bit about some of the projects that you've done, including your work in literacy, and I am of the belief that when we make progress in healthcare, it will be because we've made progress in education, and certainly literacy is such an important marker in student achievement and the education of a population. So anyway, I definitely want to thank you for your great work in that. Whoops, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. I want to start my presentation by talking a little bit about the two people on the screen. Those are my kids, Elizabeth and Thomas. The young one is the tall one. Elizabeth and Thomas are just getting back to school. Elizabeth graduated from the University of Dayton this past May and started her graduate program literally this morning at Johns Hopkins University, where she's getting a master's in public health. And Thomas, her brother, just started at the University of Dayton, where he's hoping to get a degree in economics in a couple years. And the reason I put their picture on the screen is to remind me how different the world is that they are operating in versus the world that I came of age in. I'm told by people who study generational dynamics that Elizabeth and Thomas will have 10 to 14 jobs by the time they're 38. And I think I'm on my fourth job, and hopefully my last job that I have in my career. So the pace of change that generation has to endure, I mean, there are certainly benefits to it, but I think there are also some unique challenges to that kind of pace of change. So today I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the pace of change in healthcare. And I know all of you represent a number of different industries, and it would be impossible for you also to not be kind of enduring technological changes and other things. But I would dare to say that I think the pace of change in healthcare has to outstrip the pace of change in many different industries, and I'll go into a little bit of why I say that. Oh, I've got to get synced here. I learned a new word the other day, and the word was exabyte. I'd never heard that word, but an exabyte is a number that is followed by 19 zeros. But 4 exabytes of unique information will be generated in the calendar year that we're in now. In 2017, 4 exabytes of unique information will be generated. That's more than the previous 5,000 years of mankind. And I think that, again, what generational scientists tell us is that the technical data that Elizabeth and Thomas learned in their first year of school, much of that will be out of date 2 years from now. So as business leaders, I know that you are also looking at those kinds of tsunamis of change, and I think it does present special challenges to all of us. Let me introduce the OHA to you just a little bit. We are the trade association for hospitals throughout Ohio, and there are 220 hospitals from all across the state. Many of those hospitals, but not all of them, are situated in one of 13 large health systems. Ohio hospitals directly employ 250,000 people. That is to say that 250,000 people get a paycheck directly from their community hospital. But another 250,000 have a job because there is a community hospital. Maybe some of you are in those industries. But I'm talking about, for example, a laundry service that does the linens and laundry for the community hospitals. But so fully then 500,000 people are working either directly for or because there is a hospital. We also pay over $16 billion in wages directly every year to those 250,000 employees. We had 32.5 million hospital encounters during 2015, and the OHA's mission is to collaborate with member hospitals and health systems to ensure a healthy Ohio. We do that by serving 3 strategic initiatives. One is advocacy, one is economic sustainability for the community hospital, and the third is healthcare quality and patient safety. So all of the 65 employees of OHA, everything they do tethers back to one or more of those 3 strategic initiatives. I want to talk a little bit about the advocacy component of our work, because it would be impossible for anybody functioning in our country not to have been kind of bombarded with healthcare politics over the last handful of months. I should say maybe handful of years. It feels like that's the only thing we ever talk about. But I put those headlines on the slide because all of those headlines occurred on the same single day, one day last summer. And obviously the Affordable Care Act and whether to repeal it, how to repeal it, what to replace it with, just consumed our national dialogue for so long. And I just want to mention a little bit about our perspective and why we have the perspective we have on it. Our perspective, first of all, an incontrovertible fact is that because of the Affordable Care Act, fully 1 million people roughly have health insurance coverage who did not have it before. That's not to say they didn't have access to health care, because they did, but a lot of times their access involved going to the emergency room after a symptom had become catastrophic, so it was definitely suboptimal. 750,000 people gained coverage roughly through the Medicaid expansion, and another almost 250,000 through the exchanges that operate under the Affordable Care Act. So what we have always said about the repealing of it is that as we repeal it, we need to be replacing it with something that ensures that 1 million people will continue to have some form of insurance coverage. I do think that the day the law was signed in the Rose Garden or the East Room or wherever they were, we all acknowledged that it was a very flawed law. It was a very imperfect law. And I believe that we need to be about the hard work of perfecting that imperfect law rather than simply throwing it away. For example, when Medicare and Medicaid were adopted in 1965, I think every year, and Lee and others in the room could attest to this, about every year since then, Congress has been about the work of improving or perfecting the Medicare and Medicaid law, and the Affordable Care Act is no different. I suspect that for the remainder of my career, the Affordable Care Act will be a central part of the national conversation on health policy. Now, you say, well, why is it that it has consumed so much of our national attention? And I think it is on everyone's mind because of how much it costs. Healthcare costs too much. And I believe that I will not ever find very many people who defend how cheap healthcare is. And I know you can't appreciate the individual slices of this pie, but if I might just get your attention a little bit, the purpose of this is to show you that we are a $3 trillion part of the national economy. And if you say, well, where does that $3 trillion come from? It comes from the federal government, individual households, private business, state and local government. But what's not lost on me is that every slice of that pie is you. It's either you as a taxpayer, someone paying federal taxes or state taxes or insurance premiums or just settling up out of your pocket. So I think that is why it has commanded so much of the national attention, because it matters to you on so many different levels. And if we say, okay, now we know how much we spend, $3 trillion, where does that all go? The fact is that over a 7-year period, health care increased by almost 25%, right about 25%, over 7 years. Well, you see what happened to other elements of the economy during that same 7 years. You spent less on food, you spent less on housing, you spent less on eating out of the house, clothing. And I think that we have to confess that the inflation in healthcare is displacing other things that you and the community wishes to spend your resources on. And we have to be able to deal with that. Well, since time immemorial, people have criticized the hospital community and the healthcare community, rightfully in my opinion, for being kind of uncoordinated, disjointed. The right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. And these are frustrations that are absolutely true and that we have to confess. So what are we doing about it? I think one of the things that you're seeing around the country and certainly in this community is hospitals trying to gain scale. And by that, I mean you all have asked us, and we feel the need to be more, provide more value-based quality care, to invest in technology, and that is very, very difficult to do without some amount of scale. And by scale, I don't always mean acquisition, but there are other ways to gain scale through purchasing cooperatives or through service line affiliations that are not necessarily acquisition. So you have seen hospitals throughout the country struggle with that, try to innovate, and try to get more creative about how they become more efficient as an industry and as an individual hospital. So we're working to enhance productivity, eliminate preventable complications, and provide more consumerism in healthcare. As the introducer mentioned, my wife is a pediatrician, and there are physicians here in the room. And there was a time when physicians were in training. There are physicians in practice today who, when they were in training, understood that about 10% of the people on ventilators will get pneumonia. And that's because, as Dr. Koska described, just the nature of putting this device into your lungs and laying you flat and still provides a really nice little environment for bugs to form. Well, what we learned is that with some simple interventions involving keeping the bed at a certain angle and various other things, we can prevent ventilator-associated pneumonias. And now there are hospitals today who go through years and don't have a single one. So I think that, the healthcare community has become a lot more interested in and curious about what all we can do to prevent harm in our hospitals and to drive up the quality of care. There was a recent Wall Street Journal article that indicated 2/3 of the people in our country have less than $1,000 in savings. That means they're $1,000 away from insolvency. They are a car repair away from insolvency. They are, winter's coming and they need a heater repair, and that will spend down everything they have. So we are aware as a hospital community that we are sending bills to people who have no hope of settling up with us. And I think the affordability issue is something that we as an industry have to own and help this country struggle with and resolve. And I'll say a little bit more about that shortly. The $3 trillion that you spend on healthcare goes, and there are a lot of different ways to portray this, but I would like to oversimplify it by pointing out that the largest share of it, over 80% of it, goes to deal with people with chronic conditions. And many of these chronic conditions, and much of the money we spend on healthcare, are spent on taking care of issues that we have some control over. So, for example, I always like to kind of draw the analogy with education policy. If there are educators in the room, you know that whether a child achieves excellent schoolwork or is academically gifted or whatever has somewhat to do with you as an educator. But it has an awful lot to do with the sociology of that household. If the child comes to school hungry and spends the day at school and then goes home to chaos, it's going to be very difficult for that young person to achieve, no matter what you do as an educator. And there are a lot of social dynamics in the healthcare system as well. This is kind of a good news, bad news slide. And that is to say that the 3 boxes you see on the left are kind of the bad news. We are never going to have an inexpensive healthcare system in our state when we have those kinds of statistics. We are 30%, we're more obese than the rest of the country, we smoke more than the rest of the country, and our infant mortality is scandalous. We're 42nd in infant mortality. The fact is, 42nd is better than where we started. A few years ago, OHA really started, not only OHA, but a lot of entities went to work on infant mortality, and progress is being made, but not nearly at the pace we need to make it. We were 50th in African American infant mortality and 48th in overall, and now we're 42nd overall. So we're trending in the right direction, but there's a lot of work yet to do to get that number where it needs to be. Epidemiologists tell us that infant mortality is also a very good proxy for overall community health. So that's one of the reasons we're really focusing a lot on infant mortality. The good news side of the slide are the bullets you see on the right side. And that is, if you do get sick in Ohio, you do get a very high quality of care. We rank 3rd in the country for health status for kids. Our teen birth rate is actually going down. We actually are 6th in the country in flu shots. I hope everybody in this room gets a flu shot, unless you have an egg allergy. But in any event, there are things that we do very, very well, but obviously we have a lot of work to do. Those of you who know me well, including Stan and Dr. Coast and others, know that I cannot speak for more than a few minutes without quoting Jim Collins. I think he's one of the foremost leadership thinkers and writers in the country. And Jim Collins commands leaders to confront brutal facts. And I put a brutal fact on the slide that really does not need to be, won't be news to you. When John and I get in the car to go back to Columbus, I have 2 interviews on the way home after this presentation, one from the New York Times and one from health leaders, because they want to talk to me about opioid addiction. And honestly, I wish they were talking to me about something else, because obviously this is an important problem that we need to solve. But I think Ohio has become known in the popular media around the country for our opioid problem. And this is something we absolutely have to work on. I am proud to say that the hospital community writ large is working very hard to make progress with the opioid situation. And one of the things that I'm going to tell the reporters on the way home is that we really have to work in 3 dimensions to address this problem. First, there are people who overdose and their life needs to be saved. And I hope I don't offend anyone here when I say this, but I have little patience for the current conversation that suggests we shouldn't save someone's life who has overdosed on heroin or something. Mercifully, neither one of my children have struggled with addiction. But if they ever do, I do hope that someone is there to give them Narcan and do whatever it takes to save their life. After we save their life, though, the second dimension we have to work on is taking care of addicts who wish to get better. And I know that it's difficult to take someone who doesn't wish to get better and make them so, but there is a good population of people who are addicted who do wish to get better. And the hospital community across our state is struggling to increase capacity so that when you have someone who wants to get better, they have a place to go. And I think that's been a very, very big challenge for the hospitals in our state. And the final thing, and the really difficult one that kind of speaks to us a couple slides ago, is we have to prevent people from ever getting addicted so they don't need addiction treatment or Narcan. And that is difficult. That is where it is education. And the public health and prevention community has been very instrumental in helping advise hospitals on what we can do to partner with, frankly, law enforcement and education institutions and other community partners, the clergy, to educate people on how important it is that they not become addicted and therefore need the services that we struggle to provide. Well, the hospitals across the state are doing just that. And as you see on the slide, that in 1 year alone, in 2015, Ohio hospitals invested $2.1 billion in community service across the state. And there is a legal definition for how we can calculate that number and what community service means. But that is health screenings. It's immunization clinics and community health education on the property of the hospital or the health system. So the hospitals really are trying very hard to lead the charge to better community health. You know, one of the things, and I have a lot of aha moments in my job, but my staff talked to me about sepsis, which is basically a blood infection, which I knew what it was, and I had heard of people who had that complication. Maybe certainly there are people in this room whose lives have been touched by sepsis. But I did not know that it's the single most expensive part of the health economy. So the single most expensive part of that $3 trillion pie is sepsis. And we know that there are things that we can do to get better at caring for people who have sepsis. 80% of the people who have sepsis bring it to the hospital. This is not traditionally an infection that you get while you're there. But so because of 80% of the time it arrives at the hospital from the community, we've worked with ambulance drivers and nursing homes and EMTs and others to help us identify sepsis early so that we can prevent septic shock and the natural escalation of sepsis. We're also working in the area of infant mortality on safe sleep, because I learn things all the time, but ABC, alone on your back in a crib, is how an infant is supposed to go to sleep. So we spent a lot of resources kind of educating the public and educating our own hospitals, not to put in the nurseries, not to put the babies to sleep on their bellies, and then how to train new mothers in some of those techniques. Well, I'd like to close and take your questions by talking a little bit about what you can do. And I want to close with a story that I think about all the time. And you remember the first slide I showed that had Thomas and Elizabeth. Well, Thomas grew up mostly in Iowa. My wife and I are both from Ohio, but we had spent 15 years in Iowa. And so Thomas was born there. And he came home from first grade at St. Pius Elementary School, and he said he wanted to be a hockey player. And we ignored it because, a few days before that, he wanted to be a firefighter, and it was just, there are so many phases with a kid that age that we just didn't pay any attention. I never watched hockey. No one in my family skated, so there's no reason for him to be a hockey player. And by the way, my wife is a pediatrician, so hockey was going to not happen for him. So, long story short is he did become a hockey player. I told Mary Ann, why don't we let him play? He'll be terrible at it, and he'll get through that quickly, and then we can move on to the next thing. So he didn't get tired of it. He was bad at it at the beginning. He couldn't skate. But he eventually got quite good at it. And in fact, last year when he graduated Bishop Watterson High School in Columbus, he was the captain of his high school hockey team. And it changed our lives because some of the best friends we have are friends that we met through hockey. We came up here to skate at your outdoor arena every winter. It was one of our favorite things. And we came up here for tournaments and spent the weekend in hotels with other families and just met wonderful people who we vacation with, and they will be our lifelong friends. But I asked him not all that long ago, I said, Thomas, remember all those years ago when you came home from St. Pius and you said you wanted to be a hockey player? Why? What caused you to want to do that? And now I have to tell you a different story in order to close. Des Moines, Iowa has a hockey team called the Des Moines Buccaneers. Now, this is not a team you've heard of. It is ruffian hockey. This is not NHL level stuff. This is roller derby, except hockey. And these are kids who are they're like 17 to 19 years old, and they are hoping to get discovered by colleges and then get a scholarship and play hockey and maybe go to the NHL. So Thomas said, when I asked him why he wanted to be a hockey player, he said that one of the Des Moines Buccaneers had come to his class and talked about hockey. And I thought, seriously, one of the Des Moines Buccaneers, who might have been speaking to the St. Pius class through some law enforcement community service thing, that young man changed my life for the better. And I wish I could find him and thank him for that, because he has no idea that he inspired this young man to be a hockey player and eventually captain his team and learn leadership through sports and cause us to meet friends who will know the rest of our lives. And I wish I could find him and go back and say, that was awesome that you spoke to the Pius kids that day. And I tell you that story because I believe that all of us forget the station in life we have allows us to influence people in a very, very positive way. You're a business leader, you have employees who look up to you, or you have clients who respect you. And I think that if that Buccaneer can have that kind of influence on our family, all of us have the ability to influence people in a positive way and address some of those social issues that we find so troubling about our healthcare system. Well, with that, I will thank you very much for your time, and I would be happy to take questions if time allows for that.
Thank you, sir, for your enlightening talk. I just have one question for you. Some people say that in the state of Ohio, a few years ago when they eliminated the need for certificates of need, that greatly contributed to the increase in health care costs in Ohio, and I'd be interested in your comments on that.
Well, I can tell you that I came from a state, Iowa, that had certificate of need, and so you had to get permission to build anywhere,
Right.
anything. And Iowa, like Ohio, is lamenting how expensive their Medicaid program is and how expensive their health care system is. So I don't necessarily buy that bringing CON back into our body of law would necessarily arrest healthcare inflation. There may be other reasons to do it, but I don't believe that. I think if you were to layer CON back in and cause people to ask permission to build and expand services, that 5 years from now you would wake up and still have a very inflated healthcare system.
Okay.
Good question. Hello, Scott.
Hey, Mike.
Nice to
How are
see
you? Welcome to Northwest Ohio.
Great to see
Would
you.
you elaborate on the apparent connection between Medicaid expansion and the opioid epidemic? A lot of speculation that Medicaid expansion will not continue indefinitely. So what's to become of our efforts both regionally and at the state level through OHA to address the crisis in the absence of a lot of support from Medicaid funding?
Well, it worries me very, very deeply that if we do lose Medicaid expansion, that the 750,000 people who have health coverage because of that would then be uncovered and therefore find it more difficult to access all kinds of services, including services for addiction. So we're fighting very hard in partnership with you, thank you, and your staff to keep that. And I know Barb Sears, who's now the state Medicaid director, and by the way, I'm nonpartisan and agnostic when it comes to politics, but she was a great champion for us on Medicaid expansion. I think it's no guarantee that will stay in place. There is an ideological distaste for Medicaid program, and with some legislators, they believe that Medicaid is welfare and welfare is bad, so Medicaid is bad and people shouldn't be on Medicaid. And I think that is kind of an ideological discussion to have, but the pragmatic effect of that, of taking it away, is an awful lot of people currently getting help with their addiction would find it immeasurably more difficult. Not only that, the economics, we did a map at our office that showed health systems in precarious economic circumstances. So we said if you were 2% margin or less, you're at risk as a hospital. Okay, that gave us so many lights. And then we said, okay, now let's layer in where behavioral health is being delivered in the state of Ohio. And there's a lot of overlap. If you were to lose Medicaid expansion and you were already in precarious economic circumstances, one of the quickest things you can do to solve that problem is stop doing behavioral health. And the second thing you can do to solve the problem is stop doing OB. Well, in a state that's struggling with opioid addiction and infant mortality, I think those are two very, very difficult decisions. So you pushed a button. I could go on for way too long on that, but I appreciate your inquiry.
My name is Reyes Chaudhry. I'm a Chief Medical Officer at Mercy Health St. Charles.
Thank you for
My
your work,
question
Doctor.
is about rural hospitals. Out of 220, how many hospitals have less than 40 beds? And if Medicaid expansion is canceled, what percentage of those hospitals will go out of business and won't be able to provide critical care for those communities?
Well, I will thank you for your question. And I think the natural inclination is to perceive that the most precariously situated hospitals are those in rural America. And that is often true, but not always. And there are hospitals in urban areas, suburban areas that are in extraordinarily difficult economic circumstances. And there are hospitals in small and rural Ohio that are doing famously well. You say, well, why is that? How could that possibly be? And I think part of it is that some of the small hospitals have affiliated with larger systems for various service lines like cardiology or imaging and various things like that. So they've kind of found an efficient way to get technology, and they don't have competition down there. I mean, in some of those areas, they are pretty much the sole community provider. Everybody goes there. They have a very high quality. So some of those are doing okay, but you're not wrong to kind of fret what the prognosis for them might be going forward. And I don't know what percentage of the ones that are precariously situated are in rural Ohio. But I will say, when I saw the list,
I'm sure they delay their dues if they can't pay it, so you'll know.
When
if
I
they
saw
don't
the
send their dues in, they're in trouble.
When I saw the list, I was looking for common denominators, and I thought there's got to be something here that puts you in that circumstance, and there really aren't any that are discernible to me. It's kind of a smattering of hospitals throughout the state that, for various reasons, are in very difficult circumstances.
Anyway, thank you very much. For the sake of record, as of today, there are 53 million Americans on Medicare and 73 million on Medicaid. So people don't realize Medicaid is a much bigger program.
It's the largest insurance company in the world, so it's a very important program.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Very, very interesting. As a follow-on to Riaz's question, you mentioned early on in your discussion that the Affordable Care Act, we all agree, really needs to be improved. Could you tell me what the OHA's position would be on a single-payer universal health care system, such as an extension of Medicare to all age groups?
I don't think that would be wise. And I believe that the solution needs to match the problem. And I think people are reaching for life jackets, and the number of bad ideas that get thrown around, it's dizzying, because you can kind of see the logic in just saying, we all know what's the gravitational pull is to single payer. Why don't we just cut to the chase scene and be done with it? I don't think it's smart, because I think it doesn't solve the problems that we fret about, and that is, there's nothing about that makes it less expensive. I don't think there's anything about it that makes it more efficient. So I would be opposed to it, because I just don't believe that is going to be the salve or the solution that people really long for.
Thank you for explaining your position.
Well, in this country, almost 100 years ago, we had a lot of problems with alcoholism and bootleg alcohol and fatal experiences from bad mash. There was something called prohibition. I personally think what's happening now is we're tending to the problems as they develop, but we haven't figured out how to build a fortress to stop the continuing expansion. Think about what would happen if we really took on prohibition in the old-fashioned way and really made prohibition stick. Because we're saying that, oh, he has a drug problem. And then it can be a lot more than a drug problem, as you know. It can be stealing, it can be getting other people. It is pervasive, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I would love to hear what could happen if we really thought seriously about a nationwide effort that was highly organized, very specific, and it would be for prohibition.
I think I'm trying to kind of get my brain around how to respond to that. I believe that, when you look at the social fabric of any society, there are going to be issues and challenges. And I don't know that, again, that solution necessarily would match the problem. One of the things that I one of the books I've read recently. Have you guys read Hillbilly Elegy by
Yes.
J.D. Vance? Maybe he's been a speaker up here, I don't know. But he, to me, that was one of the, that and Dreamland were the two books that really did kind of affect the way I think about addictions problems in our country. And that I think there are a lot of people who just have very chaotic lives. And for whatever reasons, they turn to substances to, get relief or, and I don't know that prohibition in any form would necessarily fix that, but I do think we have to look at why people are, why do they feel left out of the American dream? And that was one of the points of Hillbilly Elegy, is that there are an awful lot of people in this country who have surrendered. They really don't feel like the opportunity is there for them. And when they feel like that, and that is part of their psyche, they turn to drugs and other behaviors that the rest of us find very aberrant and damaging. And their addiction, there is a lot of fruit of that poison tree. Because you're right, if you are addicted, you're going to lose your job, and therefore you're not going to have money, so you're going to break into somebody's house or shoplift or whatever to get the resources you need. So it is a problem that extends well beyond just the addicted person, him or herself, and affects all of us, even if you are not actively addicted to anything yourself.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Look at this.
Really a great job at an insight into a very, very difficult problem. For being with us today, our foundation will make a contribution in your name to the Polio Plus Foundation. Thank you very much. And again, great job. Thanks, Mike. There is no meeting next week as we honor our labor workforce, so we will see you on the 11th. Enjoy your Labor Day. Dick and Kevin, thank you for sharing the gift of Rotary. We appreciate you bringing people to our club as often as you do. Both Pat and Bob, I encourage you to find your passion and get involved in our club. There's lots to do, and speaking of lots to do, we have 3 meetings following here. We've got vocational services in the North Cape room, community services in the Waynesfield room, and the Water Service Committee in the Eagle Point room. I want to say special thanks to our TRAV team, Matt Adkins, Bob Harold, past President Rick Hartley, past President Chuck Mann, and past President Walt McGee. And as you know, I always like to send you out with a smile on your face. So today's Chuck Chuckles, I don't know what we're in for, but here we go.
Leo the Lip DeRocher was a professional baseball player, manager, and coach. He may have coached the Buccaneers in hockey, too, I'm not sure. But upon his retirement, he ranked 5th all-time among managers with 2,009 career victories. Now the dark side of Leo the Lip. Leo coined the phrase, "nice guys finish last." His career was dogged by clashes with authority, especially umpires, with 95 career ejections as a manager, 4th all on the all-time list. Here's a few quotes from Leo the Lip. "Buy a steak for a player on another club after the game, but don't even speak to him on the field. Get out there and beat them to death. Win any way you can, as long as you can get away with it. If you don't win, you're going to be fired. If you do win, you've only put off the day that you're going to be fired." Here's a good thing. In the spring of 1947, Leo let it be known that he would not tolerate the dissent of those players on the team who opposed Jackie Robinson's joining the club, saying, "I don't care if the guy is yellow or black or if he has stripes like a expletive-deleted zebra. I'm the manager of this team, and I say he plays. I never question the integrity of an umpire, their eyesight, yes. And my favorite, if I were playing third base and my mother was rounding third with the run that was going to beat us, I'd trip her. Oh, I'd pick her up and brush her off and say, 'Sorry, Mom, but nobody beats me.'"
Well, Chuck, I'm not really sure those passed the four-way test, but thanks anyway. And with that, folks, I encourage you to go out and make a difference in the world today.